Hello one and all, this is Soulful Lordy, James Bullock, once again, this time around, the Forspoken demo review, exclusively for the PlayStation 5, for a game that is tentatively to be released on January 24, 2023, on the PlayStation 5 and PC. Forspoken is an upcoming action-adventure RPG developed by Luminous Productions, which is associated with the recent Final Fantasy engines. And it's almost immediate as you start playing this game that this feels a lot like Final Fantasy 15. You take control as Frey, a young New York girl who has been pulled into the land of Athia for unknown reasons, and apparently she's the chosen one. And even though in the demo we get a brief overview of why she is in the land of Athia, we don't know who really she is, why she's been proven as the chosen one, and most importantly, what is the big conflict in this land. Instead, we're given the opportunity to try out the gameplay and get used to some of the functionality when it comes to Forspoken before it is released. And of course, one of the main things is the combat. Frey is gifted the ability of being able to utilize magic and spell cast, either defensive or offensive measures. Of course, these magic attacks all have a cooldown, so you cannot spam them. You can't, say, produce the gigantic circular firewall that does double damage while inside of it while temporarily healing you. Or you can't utilize something like a leech ability, so you'll be able to pull in some health from an enemy that is struck with this magic attack. But depending on if you're utilizing Frey's magic abilities, which is more wind-based elemental, or the Sela elemental magic, which produces the fire sword, you're able to not only discover what works best to your play style, but also what is advantageous when you're taking on particular enemies, because certain enemies are vulnerable to fire more so than they are to wind. And the game does a good job of telling the player what they are invulnerable to, what they are resistant to, and what they are vulnerable to. And while this all sounds pretty impressive, unfortunately the gameplay itself feels very stiff and not necessarily fluid. It doesn't feel the most comfortable. It really doesn't. It's surprising because it seems like it should be a more fluid experience, especially with the ability to dodge roll and utilize this magical parkour that can be activated both when you're traversing and when you're actually in the middle of a battle. It doesn't feel fluid at all, which is, to me, detrimental to the overall fun of the gameplay. Even though you do get a little bit more used to it as you play through this demo, it still doesn't feel as free as you would expect. One of the biggest issues I also noticed when it came to the gameplay is being hit. A lot of the HUD presentation and the visual is minimalistic, but also is very small, so sometimes it's hard to tell exactly how much health you have and how much you've lost when you're trying to focus on these more gigantic or grandiose numbers of enemies, until you see the indication flash on the screen that you need to restore your health by hitting down on the D-pad. And this is complemented by the fact, beyond the more AoE attacks that knock Frey into the air, a majority of the time when Frey gets hit, there's no real indication. There's no forceful rumble in the control. There's no gigantic sound. There's nothing besides the fact that you see a little bit of your health now missing. Also, from an exploration perspective, we are given the opportunity to play with a more upgraded version of Frey, which, to the detriment of the overall feeling of what this game could present, we have a lot more items in her inventory. We have these nails that allow for spells to be attached to Frey's spell slot. We also have the ability to actually purchase and upgrade some of her magic abilities. And we also find the ability to run around, collect flowers for some reason, unlock some chests that could potentially give you some items that we'll be able to use for customization purposes or forging or making new items, and even some of the different modes and sub-bosses that you could find, including this gigantic dragon-like crocodile and a horde mode style presentation where you have to protect villagers from mounting odds as they continuously come in waves. I didn't have any major issues in terms of crashes or graphical glitches or what have you, so I will say at this point, with a 30 gig size download, Forspoken actually plays very well in terms of stability from an accessibility standpoint, and easily one of the biggest reasons why the game doesn't feel too great is the fact that a lot of the default settings aren't for the benefit of the player, and if you go into the options and change a lot of the settings, it might feel a lot better to play, be it traversal or combat, especially when it comes to switching between the types of magic that the player wants to utilize at a time. Why they decided to make the more tedious options the standard default setting instead of the more player friendly options is beyond me. Overall, I will say that the demo is a strong showing in terms of whether or not you would want to play this game. Like, that's one of the things that a demo should do. It should encourage you to either want or not want to play this game when it's released in full. For me personally, I probably will try it out, but I don't have the highest of hopes when it comes to generally enjoying everything about the combat, everything about the story, everything about the characters. But I also understand that this demo was placed in the middle of a situation where you don't necessarily have the best grasp of everything, all of the mechanics, the story, the characters, because you're thrust into the middle of something that you really don't understand. It's just the opportunity to try out something and see if it works for you. So if you do have a PlayStation 5, I would definitely suggest, if you're interested in Forspoken come January, to play the demo, even though the demo is 30 gigs. So if you have slow internet speeds, it will take you quite a while to download it. And if you have a data cap, of course, you might have to weigh your options. But the fact of the matter is that I think it is a great demo to inform players whether or not this is the type of game for them. But in terms of the actual gameplay itself, the game presentation, I'm still at a point where this feels like a mixed bag. And I am not that excited about it, but I will give it a try when it does come out. So there you have it. This has been Soulful Lordy, James Bullock, once again, Forspoken demo review, exclusively for the PlayStation 5, for a game that is tentatively to be released on January 24, 2023 on the PlayStation 5 and PC. Now, if you don't mind, I may actually restart this demo to see if I can do better with some of these skills and abilities and try to save some of those helpless villagers who decide that, hey, let's stand in the middle of a busy area where enemies will attack us, and if I can do my job and actually protect them all, I will get the best score, the best items possible, and make every enemy that faces me have no choice but to say, "Oh Lordy."